So I've picked up this foxbody Mustang. It was a roller, four-cylinder manual car. Went ahead and got straight to paint, do that budget Rust-Oleum paint job, and then just rattle can the engine bay. Hit it with 120 grit, the DA, and then so minimal prep because drag car. Yeah, if you're not familiar with that budget Rust-Oleum paint, it's actually really good for the money. It costs pretty much freaking nothing. So we had a white blank canvas. Were we going to leave it that way? Hell no. This was my buddy's rendering for what we wanted on the theme of the car. So we splattered a bunch of red paint at it and made it look like blood. Outlined myself like a body, and my buddy let me use his plotter for decals as well. So there we are. So once we got paint handled, we trailered it to the shop. Unfortunately, with the offensive nature of the car, my dad was making me cover it up if it was in front of the shop. But essentially what I was doing is pushing it in and out to work on it. The first thing I did was strip the interior, strip the sound deadening, and just do an extensive diet on the thing. It had a lot of trash interior in it, so that all came out. I was weighing and saving any poundage that I could. The thing was on a serious diet. I wanted to just save any weight that I could. I gutted the doors out. There's the beams coming out. We also cut out any of the inner part of the door too. There's inner fender wells, and I went ahead and tubed the front end. Saved about 20 pounds there. So I picked up this car as basically an unfinished project. It had to have sat in a barn or something because the spiders inside of it were just insane. It had an 8.8 in it, but I wasn't interested in that, so I took out all of the HVAC stuff that was worth about 50 pounds. I did a tubular front that saved about 50. Since it was a four-cylinder car, they're the lighter K-member already. And then fun fact, the lighter you get the car, the easier it is to push in and out to work on it. I planned on doing a stock fuel tank, so I just got one from the junkyard for 50 bucks. And speaking of junkyard, that's where my engine came from. I got a 0153 LS for 600 bucks, blown head gasket, but ran. So took it apart, did all of your normal sloppy fixins on it. Sloppy stage 2 cam, 32 gap rings, Gen 4 rods and pistons, and then I got to work on the turbo kit. Welded V-bands on to stock manifolds, and then went 2-inch on all the hot piping. My power goals for the car at this time was 500 wheel. That definitely changed, but we'll get there. So next step after that was just getting to work on more of the chassis, doing roll bar. My dad went ahead and bought me a 10-point mild steel roll cage, so it weighed 150 pounds. That was with plates, but that doesn't include the welding, so it's about what it added for weight though. And there's my kid just helping me out with positioning the uppers. Some of the other cages I had seen, you didn't have a lot of room from the steering wheel, and I didn't want that, so I actually needed to redo my upper halo bar just because of that, but it's worth it. So I left the rears unhooked because you have to tilt it forward to weld the top part. So there's me doing that, and then I did battle boxes for the upper and lower torque boxes and swing outs. So once the cage was all done, once again my dad sponsored rear suspension for me, and a Ford 9-inch. Basically I had to pick it out of a field, but it was so freaking rusty we couldn't even get the drums off of it. I had to weld nuts just to use a 3-prong puller, impact that bitch off. It kept the brake shoe freaking pad, but got that bitch off. It was a heavy duty OE housing and obviously needed extensive work. This was my first time doing narrowing a 9-inch myself, or narrowing a rear end at all. I supervised one time, so yeah, it was a good adventure. I did 33 spline axles and a spool, and then 350 gears. Another thing that changed with this car is I planned on doing a power glide. So here I was able to get in contact with Marilat Racing, and they're the ones who set me up with all those brackets for getting a 9-inch into a foxbody. In hindsight, probably just should have stayed with the 8.8 and built that, but it is what it is. I also got double adjustable uppers and lowers. Now I'm going to give you the disclaimer now. My MIG welds don't look amazing. I learned a lot through this car. It taught me a lot, but if my welds aren't looking pretty enough for you, it is what it is, bud. So we braced up the 9-inch. There's me mocking it up to get the uppers. The uppers are really tough on this. So I basically use that's the outer part of the upper control arm, and I was just going for getting it as square as possible. It's a very crucial item, but it's hard to get it right, man. And then there's a lift block for a jack point and also to tie in that lower suspension. So there it is, tidied up, just needing an anti-roll bar, and I thought I was sitting pretty. Got back in touch with Marilat Racing, said set me up with a sway bar, and there's the conversation that changed so much of my build. He said, oh, your brackets are different, you got to go with this style. And so those rear springs that I was using, the perch style, I had to air chisel them out and they came right out. There's me futilely trying to still use a stock tank, but I still had to do an upper crossbar for the anti-roll bar. Yeah, that was the big thing that I had to change here, is that I plan on using a stock tank and still have somewhat of a stock trunk. So as things snowballed with project, as they always do, I was cutting more and more out of the rear trunk, which honestly ended up being a good thing. A lot of things in the trunk aren't even symmetrical. The spare tire well is way off to the left. So when you cut a lot of that crap out, you're able to get things a lot more square and symmetrical left to right, which is good. So in hindsight, it's good. I ended up going with the AFCO Big Gun X shocks, which are way better than I ever planned on using. So cut a lot of crap out and ended up just going with a fuel cell. Those brackets for mounting the reservoirs are actually for twin fuel pumps. That's a twin fuel pump mount, but they pretty much fit those. There's my kid helping me out and getting the fuel cell all squared away. My dad donated a Turbo 400 for this project, so there was some catches with that. It had no third gear, but we'll get to that. So there's how I plumb the fuel system. We have a primary fuel pump and a secondary with a check valve. There's the fuel cell mounted. It's my first time doing a fuel cell. There was a lot of firsts with this car. I was way out of my comfort zone with a lot of it. So I ended up getting a hanger and the dual pumps inside of that hanger of that fuel cell. And there's the cage and everything pretty much done now. Don't have any pictures of me mounting an engine, but I'm sure you've seen somebody mount an engine in a car. It looked like that. I plan on using a GT45 as a turbo since my power goal was 500 wheel. But I also plan on using a stock trunk and relatively uncomplicated rear suspension. But I did plan on a very big radiator because street car. So as you can see, the hot side is very close to that. So I was kind of deciding, what are we going to do with this core support? Cut it out, of course. So lower core support was completely removed. Upper core support, 75% removed. Tucked the radiator in. I still ended up moving that T4 flange forward and getting it further away from the radiator. So there's the exhaust off of my Supra that you may have seen. That ended up being recycled for the downpipe on this car. And as we talked about my power goal, that increased. I ended up going with a 7875 billet. It's a Gen 1. The next gen or 2.5 or anything didn't exist at this time. So 3-inch downpipe. I always buy JDM speed parts just out of the irony of an LS. And then we did 01, Cobra, brakes, knuckles, so 5 lug. And there's just a lot of late nights at the shop, you know, drinking beer and contemplating your life choices. So I do want to point out, it did not have a transmission hooked up to it. I did use a bare case for mock-up when I mounted the engine, but yeah, all we had was a flex plate and a starter for this year. So I just wanted to hear it run. It's good motivation to hear your project run. We were about 5 years into the build at this point, so yeah, I wanted to hear it run. So everything went well, hearing it run for the first time, no leaks. But then it was time to get a transmission hooked up to it and make the wheels go around. So I got the shifter here and got to work on this Turbo 400. This was my first Turbo 400. I am not an auto trans guy whatsoever, so I used a lot of resources on YouTube, basically followed the recipe for 1,000 crank horsepower build, and it ended up solving the issue. I don't know what it was of why it didn't have third gear, but yeah, all the things I replaced ended up making it work. So after that, it was just a bunch of wiring, a crazy amount of wiring. We had a painless system for chassis, and then I had to use some of the stock foxbody stuff. The ECU was an MS3 gold box. We had to tie that in. So it was about 75% aftermarket and about 25% stock foxbody. I was having to decipher a lot of the stock foxbody stuff, which was just not fun. But yeah, there it is with the dash and looking a lot more like a car. The wiring getting a lot more tidied up. Fun fact, all of those interior pieces you see, the dash, the door panels, that's all vinyl paint and basically rattle canned, but it looks decent. Everything went great as far as tuning it on trans brake and seeing some amount of boost. So after that, what else are you gonna do? You're gonna drive the thing and get it out of the hole it's been for the last 4 years. There's it getting gas for the first time. I took it super easy for its first drive. Did a slight trans brake launch, but that's it. Hey bro. Hey. Knuckles. Good job. You're freaking dirty.
I am.
Yeah. We did it.
How come you're saying good job to me?
Because we did it. We drove the Mustang.
Yep.
Hopefully you guys are a little more caught up now. Stay tuned. I've already hit the dyno with it, and that should be my next video, is covering that.